Welcome to the Blue Swan podcast. Today we have Jennifer Hersch. She is currently the head of stewardship at Cambridge's executive MBA program. Former entrepreneur, raised £3 million to run a yoga studio that was mentioned in Harper's Bazaar, and was the former head of the executive MBA program for 25 years, and an avid flamenco dancer who did ballet professionally prior to that. And so, on that note, would you mind sort of talking about yourself a little bit and introducing any aspects that, I may have missed or anything you'd like to expand upon?
Yeah, I think like most people, I think in our generation, from my generation onwards, I will say, that who we are career-wise has had a little bit more freedom and flexibility to also be who we are more spiritually, I think. So the fact that I've been able to straddle various fields, I think is sort of something that is newer in society that you're allowed to explore. So yeah, so I think about myself, I've sort of straddled and had an interest in academia. Uh, I find the pursuit of education something I'm passionate about. So that's one aspect. So I've always stayed involved in that area. But then having been a dancer since I was little, I think that anyone who's been in the arts or has been a dancer or whatever your art form is, if it's something that is essential to who you are, as essential as breath is, so to speak, that you can't ever lose it. So I think as an adult, I always kept coming back to that soul level of my existence. So while I was practically moving forward and taking on roles in various organizations and whatnot, that I then found a way to try to combine the practical with the more personal when I opened the studios in both Cambridge and in London. And that was interesting because then I've realized I've always wanted to share what was special about the art form of dance with people who weren't dancers necessarily. And then as I explored into yoga, the same thing, what I've learned about that. I think some people, if you're drawn to teaching and whatever your art form is, that you just have this impulse to want to share everything that you're getting at. So yeah, so in terms of entrepreneurially, I've done some businesses within the fitness space, which we can talk about fitness. It always feels weird when we just say fitness. I feel like that sort of makes it one dimensional, and I feel what my interest was larger than that. And then uh, interested in education. So in terms of professionally, I've always sort of ended up into academia constantly and back again. I was away and back. It's a bit like a honey and a bee that I can't somehow stay away. I think that I'm attracted to people who are curious, people who are being on the cutting edge of research. I find something pure in the pursuit of education versus selling, I don't know what you'd be selling, pharmaceuticals or knives or what have you. And then the third aspect is always training. I think until I die, I think I'll always need to train. And that's my therapy, that's my voice, that's my sanity. And so, yeah, so I think for a lot of people, I think opening up the possibility of using the body as a tool for for healing, for self-expression. It's the only thing we have while we're here on Earth to really, that is your really only your house. It's the only thing you really need at the end from a more macro perspective. So,
Thanks. Yeah, so my parents actually they met doing Tai Chi back at Rutgers in the 1970s. And so the thing about that is that there was actually a 4 credit course on Yang style Tai Chi taught at Rutgers back then, by somebody named Joe Sungwa. And so there are people on the faculty of Princeton's physics department who, are members of the Beijing Chen style, Tai Chi Association, that are also doing research there. And Cambridge has historically been influenced heavily by people like Joseph Needham way back during World War II, who focused on Chinese and Eastern science and the impact on that. And I
mm,
think that there's always been an interesting mix between sort of the art and the science, specifically at Cambridge. And that was one of the things that I found most beautiful about the university's culture.
mm,
And so in terms of sort of art and movement and fitness, sort of dance, yoga, there, so there have been some changes. And so like in this day and age, there's a heavy focus on social media influence. And part of that is the business model entertainment where the number of followers is important. And I guess it can feel a lot like, that scene in Seven, where the guy's being force-fed, tomato sauce and little chips from the table until he explodes. And so and that is kind of harmful. And well, well, that's not necessarily something that's great to say in Los Angeles. The social media systems are kind of designed that way. And so, would you mind talking a little bit about sort of some of the negative effects of social media on the arts?
Well, I think, I mean, the algorithms themselves are set towards the worst of the human impulses, right? I mean, it basically, the body, for fitness, the body becomes a commodity rather than the body as an instrument. And so there can be a split of that. I think I'm probably the only human being still that doesn't have an Instagram account, especially in the fitness world, which seems like a obscure thing. And sometimes I think I should learn how to use it in a way that feels authentic, but I haven't yet to find a way in where I feel like you're not posing as something rather than being the thing itself. And the older I get, I only want, it's a bit like in the Buddhist sword. I feel like the sword of wisdom, it's sort of everything I say and do and represent, I want it to be 100% true. Each year that I get older and you experience more. And so I just haven't found a way into social media in that way where I feel, how can I be sure that I'm still that everything is 100%, a bit like haiku poetry, where I feel, you know, a workout or who you present yourself should only be what is true and necessary, and all the BS beyond that is left out. So if you could shape your life, and if you can use social media in that way, where you think of it like haiku poetry, where every word, every image, everything I'm saying is 100% true, and I'm not just doing that to meet the number of followers and whatnot. Maybe that's one approach. But in terms of the negative impacts, I just think it's hard. I mean, the whole title is Insta, so it's an instant. So it becomes what that image is, and we know that the image is always disconnected from what an ultimate truth is, right? You have relative truth and you have ultimate truth. And I feel any true path using the body, if you want to call that fitness, if you want to call it performing art, if you want to call it yoga, but it's always to become more authentic. So you're moving away from the image and you're moving more inward. In a way, the image disappears, you become faceless. And there's an essence that replaces that. So I feel, going back to this commodity thing, where the body, one of my most annoying things is when I go and I see yoga quotes and whatnot on Instagram, and it's someone in a bikini. It's usually sexualized. It's a way, someone in a bikini by the beach, a picture of the bum, some quotes from someone who's, it sounds terrible, for someone who's 20 years old, who's grown up sort of needing to have the attention of that. So it's hard because you're trying to strip away those layers. At the same time, there's an appreciation for people wanting it, right? There's appreciation for people trying to be at a deeper level. And it's hard because on the other hand, there's some good messaging that can get out there, and social media democratizes the ability to get messaging out. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that when advertising agents and modeling agencies and when it had all the power, so they were the ones who would dictate who's beautiful, what is beauty, what messaging got out. And there was huge amounts of money. If you were using advertising, any individual wouldn't be able to do that. And now anyone can say, I'm going to be beautiful in the way I want to be beautiful, and I'm going to promote myself. Or I can have my own small business and I don't have a lot of money, but I'm able to capitalize on that. It's also enabled people to have a nomadic ability to travel and to live a life they want to live by making money off of their social media. So I don't want to demonize it so much either. There is a negative part, like anything, there's the underbelly of something that can be negative, but in a way it's positive in the sense that it does give everyone the power to have a voice and to be heard. But then it creates a lot of noise, and then the algorithms will choose, you're basically building towards the algorithms. And I think that's a deeper question, which I know there's some Silicon Valley tech people who comment on this, which is what are the algorithms and do we need to actually change the algorithms to change the way that social media can be used in a more positive light? Does that
Um,
make sense?
it makes a lot of sense. I mean, so I think after sort of dealing with the exit process and sort of seeing the inside of startups and entrepreneurship a little bit, I'm hesitant to believe that the social media algorithms will sort of be changed and geared more towards humanity and less towards monetization. And that unfortunately, like for the system in Silicon Valley, that's kind of the way it is, and it's also like how they exist. And so like for companies to be that large and profitable and influential on a global scale, like Facebook or Instagram, which is part of Facebook. It's like there are certain moral compromises that are have essentially been made in order to do so. And so yeah, I think that there are aspects of being genuine to oneself that are sort of important in life and professionalism. In entertainment, there's sort of an interesting blur. And so in acting specifically, like your job is to not be yourself. It's to become something or someone else according to whatever role you're playing. And so
Yeah,
sometimes
but on that, sorry, just but on that front, I mean, the best actors and actresses will always, we are everything. It's to think that you're separate from every human emotion or every possible human action is also incorrect, right? So to be authentic to yourself isn't clinging to I'm a separate, unique individual necessarily. It is also being able to maybe be more authentically human. So you know the human condition, and an amazing actor or actress, I would imagine, is able to tap into that and express it. What can I ask you then? How would you define the difference between entertainment versus an art form when you're speaking about acting, and where's the line for you?
I think it depends. And so I think that, but personally, I'm not all that comfortable with like very revealing modeling positions and everything. And that's sort of what drove me more towards the acting side. And also and so I think that the over sexualization is something that some people are comfortable with, usually more models than anything else. And a lot of them were dancers or yogis or
Mm.
something else. And so like if you look on the rosters of agencies like Wilhelmina, they were a lot of them were professional athletes in some kind of a more artistic performance-based form instead of let's say CrossFit or running or swimming and whatnot. It was a more comprehensive way of moving the body, and that mechanically speaking, it's movements in dance, martial arts, yoga, etc. They train and condition the body in a more comprehensive way. And it's comprehensive in the sense that everything is being used naturally. And so like the transitions, will work opposing muscle groups, everything is structurally held in place. And there's an emphasis on blending, aspects of cardiovascular exercise, strength and power conditioning, and flexibility. And so when you see those split jumps in Russian ballet, that's an expression of sort of all three aspects of athleticism in sort of more of an artistic form. And so um I think that I've talked to a lot of stunt people, and the general consensus is that certain things kind of have to be changed for film. And so and the dilemma is that a lot of that is about sort of the camera angle. And so a lot of very high level martial artists or dancers will make these very like small compact movements. And so there's a structure and very small rotations within rotations. And that to do that effectively on screen, you have to intentionally expand the diameter of those circles. It's got to be like a very large movement.
Mm,
in order to actually work on screen, and the producers need that because they're tied to their own investors. Um, and so I think that I'm comfortable sort of augmenting some of that. Um, Personally, I know a lot of good martial artists who were initially from the traditional end, and so and like the orthodoxy of certain martial arts really is against a lot of the martial arts tricking, the aerial twists and kicks, and some of them have spoken out about how like they got a double hip replacement in their
mm,
50s because of those movements, and it's like they have injuries and health problems from wushu that they can't escape because of the loss of that structure.
mm,
And in dance, it's kind of like they have oversplits, and when you raise the leg up too much, you're putting the angle of your pelvis in a
mm,
very, very unnatural position. And like that can cause, a number of potential issues. There are ways you can do it, but it's like there's certain limits to the human body, and sometimes those are intentionally sort of surpassed. Because it's flashy and people sort of like it on the film. And
mm,
so I think that I like to maintain being genuine to myself and the martial arts and everything, but I think that one of the realities is that I think I have to be okay with changing certain aspects in order to sort of continue doing any kind of stunt fighting or martial arts acting or just acting as a whole.
mm,
And that I think I've become more comfortable with that, and that there's a time and place there to be yourself and then to be someone else. And I think
mm.
that um, it can be easy to sort of lose yourself in a role, which is where method acting can get dangerous. And you see people like Heath Ledger having breakdowns when they're playing the Joker and whatnot.
Yeah. I've
Um,
often wondered that, not being an actress myself, and watching people, and I've seen The Joker, and actually that's a film I've wondered, how do you even come out of that afterwards? Because you have to explore dark places that of yourself that most people don't want to ever go to.
According to certain acting teachers, like Ivana Chubbuck, in her book The Power of the Actor, like there's sort of an emphasis on experience and sort of bringing up memories in your personal life that were very emotional. They could have been joyous, they could have been extremely painful, and then you sort of there's an element of psychological transference where you put that in play as you act. And so that I think is somewhat dangerous, and that like there's a reason why a lot of actors may feel kind of have certain insecurities about just sort of being actors or actresses in that sense.
I think, I mean, for me, and again, one of my passions now at a different stage of life is to bring what the performing arts offer and what you feel when you, from an acting point of view, you must feel at certain points. I know from dancing in flamenco, they call it the duende, which is a term we don't have in English, but duende is when you see a dancer and he or she is in sync with the musicians, and it's just it's a moment of honest truth, and it's a moment of being moved. And so my goal now is to get people who don't have the normal person, to expose them to the power that they can have, to those moments, when you're sweaty on stage and you're feeling the music and you're feeling something ethereal, to bring that down to teach people who've never experienced something like that to be able to use their bodies and to be able to listen to music and interpret music, and to bring their emotions out, to express something about themselves, and to feel that it's a sacred feeling. Um, to bring a bit of spirituality into it. It's something that makes you, it's that yearning to understand this state that we're in, this orphan stardust state, which we all feel in one way or another. Where did we come from? Why are we here? This awe of your micro experience against the macro realization of the multitude of universes and what is out there. How do you understand that? And that we come from that. Um, anyway, I feel like that's behind, when you start to peel away, that's behind a lot of what we do and the drive to create. There's a composer who I quite like, and I've started listening to again. I don't know if you know Arvo Par.
I have not. I listened to a couple of his songs on Spotify.
Yes, an Estonian composer. And if you can, on YouTube, there's some of them are in English, some interesting short documentaries of him speaking. And he's just, if I could look at someone who's expressing in music what I feel, it's him. He's such a beautiful, pious, spiritual, quiet man, who's a genius. His music is minimalist, and his whole thing is to bring out the quiet spaces. So he doesn't try to overload the listener. So for him, the truths are in what you don't hear, that silence speaks louder than the notes themselves. And it's just some really beautiful, in terms of me and moving and thinking of movement. I used him a lot when I was teaching in classes and making sequences. He leaves room for breath, for reflection. Let's not overcrowd it with noise. Um, and so I just use him as an example of someone who's been able, through music, to make the listener feel something. And I feel like us as performing artists, you're trying to do the same thing. You want to move people. And so if you're not performing on stage and you're doing it in a teaching sense, that can you do the same thing? I mean, I often felt I could work 15 hours a day, which is much easier than teaching an hour class where you're having the expectation to inspire people, to take them on a journey somewhere, to have a dialogue. I've had people have breakdowns in classes or breakthroughs, or, you're carrying all of that, which to me is tougher than normal matrix work, if you will. You're working 12 hours a day, which feels a lot easier.
Yeah, no, it goes along with the adage, you do what you love and you never work a day in your life.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and so I think that in terms of sort of emotion and movements and everything else, like there are elements of self and loss. And so some of the best martial artists that I ever met were former Green Berets. And so Mike Bingo
Mm.
was a former master sergeant in the U.S. Special Forces who, trained with some of the orthodox martial artists in Taiwan. And so this sad reality of reaching the rank of a master sergeant in the special forces ultimately means that you've racked up a certain body count. And
Mm.
so and that comes with its own share of PTSD. And I
Mm.
think that a lot of phenomenal martial artists, sort of they soothe themselves through the training. And then
Mm.
that's where elements of sort of maintaining a blank slate, like as you practice, is sort of what I think really it soothes that aspect, but also it's what enables, like Duende. It's
Mm.
I think that the way it's conditioned and the way the intention is expressed is a little bit different because it's about, the notion of you practice movements and mechanics hundreds of thousands of times until it's just reflexive. And like you don't even realize you're doing it. You're just responding and your body is in flow.
There's Martha Graham, who was one of the founders of contemporary dance. And she has a quote which says basically you have to train 10 years, not 10, that's 10,000 hours is the other book, but you have to train for 10 years to free yourself to dance. And so it's just, it emphasizes again how much discipline and rigor and commitment and how much you have to train the body as an instrument to free yourself to do what you wanted to do. So as you said, so you're in the flow, you're able to do it. You're not thinking about your posture and where to place things, that it's there for you to utilize and how you want to use it.
And I think that there are interesting expressions of that in films like The Kingsman. And so, in that, you've got, Gregory Rasputin who's having a fight with Conrad Oxford. And of course, Rasputin was a Russian starets, which is like a mystic, right? And
Mm.
so, and the way he fights in the film is very, very, very graceful. It's like,
Mm.
halfway between Natalie Portman and the Black Swan and an MMA fighter. And so he does these pirouette-like movements as he punches and sort of, spins around while balancing. And it's very graceful, but it's combined with a certain emotionality. And that of course, he's killed by the Oxfords at the end of it, but um, it's what I think is one of the most accurate expressions of artistic athleticism in entertainment because it combines, the background music with the movements, with various aspects of emotionality and art, and that when it comes to the breakdown of a scene, um, like there are very few notable choreographed fight scenes that have no dialogue and no emotion. And so I think that there's an aspect to having to sort of break that zen in order to add a layer of emotional expression and complexity for film specifically, but that doesn't actually lose it doesn't lose that sense of duende. It just kind of it augments the purity of the art behind it.
Mm. You're just making me think. I'm thinking of just my through my lifetime, the pace um, of the film dialogue and whatnot, which has changed. I feel as if now there is a constant need to have something every second, whether it's a loud explosion or people speaking. That it's been a long time since I've seen a film that's been stripped back. That, and I think sometimes you're drawn aware to some of the more some artistic films where there's less said, maybe. I mean, I'm thinking, I remember I did a film class many years ago as an undergraduate. I did a film major, and we watched a lot of Jane Campion films, who did the From the Piano, and she had a few other films as well. And she was just very fascinating for me because as an 18-year-old, to see suddenly a film from a female point of view and to realize just how I had been indoctrinated into viewing myself sort of through an assumed male gaze all these years through films, and that she sort of flipped that on its side, and to watch a film suddenly from a female point of view. There's things that people don't realize, how your subjectivities are being disciplined through things like pop culture and how you're learning to view films, what you're viewing in films. Um, and she was just, and she has a lot, there's space in her films. And The Piano is a beautiful, I think, example of the visuals mixed with the use of music, mixed with very interesting acting, with has less words. And her relationship with is it Harvey? Who is it? Harvey Keitel, I think, is the was the main actor that she then had a relationship with. So just their relationship as well. And she chooses men in her films that aren't what you would consider to be sexually appealing men necessarily, in terms of they don't look, should we say, like Brad Pitt. They're different types of characters, but it's very appealing to the feminine sense or sensuality, because she knows how to find what's attractive in men in a different way on film, what is interesting in the way he acts and moves, and it's less about just the physical appearance. I'd use that as an example of, you were talking about how things are crowded in a way in films, that I found you made me think just sort of the evolution of my own viewing experience and drawing out some films where something maybe have been done that was more interesting.
There are some differences in terms of I guess what's considered a male or female expression of movement, and then there's the harmony between them. And so one of the things you mentioned is that, if you take someone that you're dating to a hot yoga class, you'll be able to tell everything about them. And so,
Yeah.
I
One of
know
my secret hot yoga teaching powers.
hot, yeah, but I think that there's an element to the method, and the very high level dancers have sort of expressed something similarly in classes. And
Well, this is interesting. I mean, this is a larger topic if you wanted to get into the topic of hot yoga, which of course was started by Bikram, who I trained with, I was certified under him, met him many times. If people don't know, he's now having all these legal allegations with sexual misconduct. In any case, him aside, the form that he created, which he passed on from his guru, Vishnu Ghosh, he basically, people who don't know him, all he talks about is that he's fulfilling his karmic duty to his guru more so than himself. But I think what's genius about the hot yoga as a method is that it's 26 postures, 2 breathing exercises. So in terms from a scientific point of view, you have a very controlled environment, right? Every class is quote unquote the same, yet as you practice, and if you practice seriously, you realize no one class is ever the same. So of all the thousands of classes I've taken over the 20 years, I've never once had the same experience. And you just realize right away the awareness that you are always changing, sort of the Buddhist truth. There is no me that is always the same, that every second you're changing. And he creates an environment which pushes all your buttons because he makes you uncomfortable. And as we know, any of us who've trained, if you're an athlete or professional athlete, you learn that it's the discomfort where you really learn who you are. And so heat just becomes a tool to push you into that uncomfortable space. And the Bikram studios are not luxurious, at least historically. They've never been these luxurious spaces. They usually have a gross carpet. You go in, it smells like sweat. You're next to someone, in New York City and in London too, you're right next to somebody. So you're not there. It's not one of these luxury retreat yoga places where you go and you're smelling incense and you've spent a lot of money. So it's not that kind, which I've never been attracted to. It sort of gets right to the core of things. So in terms of teaching, so my point of this is that you're setting up parameters. If you want to see what somebody is really like, you can see them in the room. So I would always say you can see when someone comes in if they have commitment issues because they're falling out of postures the whole time. And Bikram is very much you hold the posture still for a minute, you do it again for 30 seconds or so. So it's a still, you do a posture, you hold it, then you're into stillness. You do another posture, hold it, you're into stillness. So it's not something where you're moving all the time. And so people who can't do that, I would say commitment issues 101. They're going to be all over the place. As soon as something feels uncomfortable, they're out. So that's one thing. Another reaction often is externalizing. So they feel uncomfortable. They want to leave the room, or they hate the teacher, or they can't stand the person next. It's everybody else's fault but their own. So that's another insight you can find out about someone. If they're constantly needing to sip water and have no self-awareness, and in terms of their space with other people around, you can see if someone just is selfish and doesn't have any sense of their actions and their impacts on other people. So I say this, I said it to you in kind of a joke, but it is true. You can see what people are like, your partner is like in it could be anything, I suppose, but this is just a very controlled, you take them for 90 minutes. It's a hot space. It's same postures. And also how long are they able to do that? Or are they bored? Do they do it a year and then they're bored? They don't see the value in all the micro moments in a Bikram class that you can learn about yourself, find awareness, fine tune, being infinitely curious about the simple things in life and realizing how deep you can go. So someone who gets bored quite easily usually would mean probably they're not someone who will want a lot of depth in life, which is fine. Maybe you're not either. Maybe that's fine. But if you're someone who's really always looking for stripping away yourself and stripping away falseness, and you're looking for getting closer to whatever that universal power is, whatever you want to call it, then you want someone who's okay with that.
In terms of stillness and movement, a lot of the Orthodox martial artists used to do things where like you would be holding like one stance, like a variation of a back lunge with your arms held out for half an hour on each side, and then after half an hour you would switch, and you would supposed to be, you're breathing, you're maintaining a certain, physical structure throughout the entire thing. But you quickly learn that gravity is a
Mm-mm-mm.
brutal teacher, and that like oftentimes when people first do it, like after about maybe 5 minutes, like your body actually starts to sort of shake and like and want to collapse, and so it teaches a certain physical and mental discipline which is then it's translated into the actual movement. And so, and that teaches you to maintain essentially perfect form at the beginning and the end of the movement.
Started this last year just to do something different and to cross train and to move in a completely unnatural way to myself. I started some boxing classes. And one of the things I've noticed just with people around is just how much they think they need everything. So water bottles and phones and this and that. And I just feel like for 1 hour class, can you just why can't you not walk into a room and not have all these things? Do you really need to be sipping water after 5 minutes? And so I kind of, my old disciplined cat wants to come in and say, try to just walk in with nothing. Don't reach. Do you really need to have that water bottle? Like, where's this sense of need coming from? And I mean, one of my interests is to teach people to strip away things. I think you're constantly going back to this commodity idea. You're constantly being told all the things that you need, and we're always grasping. And we think to feel better, you need more, that the answer is in taking on more. And what you realize as you start to penetrate your truths more is that it's actually a stripping away, that you don't want more, that you want to, what is it? What is your intent and what is your energy? I think those are the two things you need to approach your training with and you need to approach your life with. This is my intent. This is my energy. And anything that deviates from those two things, whether it's people, whether it's things, whatever it is, you eliminate. I mean, one of my alter ego has this idea of a yurt somewhere, a nice yurt, but just a very simple existence in nature with training and with doing my passion and those three things and my loved ones. And that's it, like just stripping back. So I don't have stuff. I don't have house things. I don't have a closet full of things. You know, I'm not there yet, but it's an alter reality. I have a picture on my laptop of this yurt and a fireplace and what it would look like, but no, I'm still in the grasping a little bit, I suppose. I'm not fully enlightened yet in many ways.
I think everybody kind of has a certain progression to their path and their journey to what they perceive as enlightenment. It's interesting to see in entertainment sometimes. And so people talk about how Tony Jaa was very, very Buddhist in nature. And so
Hmm.
and like he temporarily sort of vanished from the entertainment industry in spite of massive fame and success because he grew tired of some of the politics and the vanity within the entertainment industry.
I mean, I've always been fascinated with comedians because I've always thought comedians, I've always sensed some deep, there's people who I find have quite sensitive souls who who've tapped into that and who used humor as a way to navigate it, and that they probably feel a lot and are probably more prone to depression and whatnot than other people. Yet they're comedians, and I think probably their projected selves, people think they're happy-go-lucky all the time. And Jim Carrey, I've seen some interesting interviews lately, and I know, obviously know nothing about him other than he's a comedian, but I've seen him in this stage of his life, who seems quite interesting, that he's gone on a more introspective path and trying to find get closer to the ultimate sense of truth rather than the relative. And sometimes maybe, I suppose, once you've had everything, it's easier to see through the emptiness of those things, whether it's fame or all the things that everyone's told to chase. Once you've had it and you realize you're no more fulfilled than you were without, then you start seeking truths which aren't dependent on an object or a thing or even a person.
Things I realized during the exit process is that like no matter how much money somebody has or doesn't have, that no life is entirely perfect. And
Hmm. Well,
for
perfect is Instagram, isn't it? It's a moment that's frozen and that doesn't exist really. I mean, the perfectionism is in the imperfection. That's what's interesting. I mean, what to me, people are now, I mean, looking quote unquote perfect these days is so much easier, isn't it? So I feel almost ugliness is becoming the exotic, and I find it interesting and intriguing. And people's imperfections I find 10 times more interesting than their portrayed perfectionisms. But anyway, go on. You just made me think Instagram is perfection, and go on.
I mean, so I feel like a lot of entertainment is manufactured perfectionism. And so like
How do you define perfectionism?
honestly dopamine. And so the reason I say dopamine is that all of these things on social media are designed to really hit the dopamine receptors. You know,
Which is a
to
reaction. So that's an
as
interesting idea.
yeah, as
Perfection as a reaction, a
yeah,
positive.
to make people feel good and that certain things are intentionally washed away. And some of that is with technology and visual effects. And so, for instance, like if you look at Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and you look at his face, he looks 20, 30 years younger than he actually does in real life photos. And so part of that is that part of visual effects is literally de-aging
Mm.
faces of characters, or changing the faces from a stunt performer to be like the face of an actor. So the
Yeah,
physicality
well,
of the movement is captured, but like the persona is transferred. And I think that that kind of technology, that's a sense of perfectionism, because it's about, I guess, removing anything that is unappealing to make it sort of more rewarding to an audience.
well, and then you just touched on the point, which is we're in a very much youth-oriented culture that it's all about being youthful. And we anything that hints at aging, we don't want to face. As we can imagine, some different cultures and ancient cultures where the elders were revered and wisdom was revered, as where I think when you live maybe in society based on consumption, you don't want wisdom, right? Because you're then realizing that you're good enough and you're not buying anything to feel better. The whole thing is to convince you that you have a sense of lack. Therefore, you need to buy. It's how the economy works on a personal level. So therefore, if you value youth and you have everyone chasing that, your economics of consumption can continue. And so, I mean, I met someone now, especially being a female at this stage of life, where you suddenly feel, wow, where's my appreciation for who I am and where I'm heading? I mean, the arrow is only going in one direction. So there's an interesting, Raman Das is a spiritual teacher. He's now passed away, but he has an interesting, I've watched on YouTube, there's a lecture basically on aging and his experience with it. So if anyone wants to watch, it's an interesting area to explore for those of us who are thinking about aging and coming to terms with it and whatnot. Yeah, fear of death, I suppose, is at the end of that, why we don't want to deal with it. And the idea of decay and loss is not something we, as a culture, want to give voice to.
I'll have to watch those. And so I think a lot of that has to do, within entertainment specifically, and the reason why there's somewhat of a thriving longevity, ecosystem in Los Angeles biotechnology, is that so economically speaking, people become assets, and the economic reality of a celebrity is that you have a person who is an asset. Their image is copyrightable, their voice is copyrightable. So you license their image, you license their voice, and those aspects of an individual, literally they become intangible assets.
Mhm.
And so the constant chase of perfectionism, whether it's emotional expression, or whether it's sort of physical appearance, in entertainment, I ultimately believe that it has to do with maximizing asset value.
Mm.
And yeah, and so it is.
Well, and that also is what you're saying. It's also why now, and what I said earlier about social media and the democratization of being a star. So now you can have anyone who's experiencing that, they don't have to be a Hollywood superstar, will experience the same psychological effects of being an asset to themselves. right? So that's why you have so many young people who are unhappy and having issues when from their social media success, right? Because that pursuit of perfection and need to be perfect all the time and need to have followers. It's like grasping again from a Buddhist point of view, which causes suffering. You're grasping, 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 causes suffering. So in a way, it creates a, a pandemic of subjective issues with anyone who's experiencing what you would think of any type of fame.
I think part of that is the at a certain point, like, you people learn to be someone else in the eyes of others. And like and and so when it comes down to social media influencers, like that's kind of a part of maintaining that business empire. And so, for instance, when you look at the economics of everything, Mr. Beast, pulled in about $500 million in revenue from his social media empire. He
Mm.
has very few film credits. It's not traditional acting. He's a social media influencer, but hundreds of millions of views, and that translates and that scales like a technology company for a person versus, like, let's say Robert Downey Jr.'s, media empire pulled in about 66 million in the last year. And
Yeah.
that's with, leading talent agencies, licensing, film contracts, etc. And so there's a lot of
Look at the Kardashians. I don't even, all I know is their name. I have to say, I don't know much about them. I've stayed away, but they've created a huge empire. And not only that, they've changed the whole nature of what beauty is. I mean, everyone looks like a Kardashian now. So, I mean, what power is that you've just completely changed how women view themselves, what's considered attractive? Um, yeah, I don't know.
I
Sorry,
mean,
you made me think of them as well on the female side of what an empire has been built all
so
based on the same things you were mentioning,
so
right?
when
Beauty, image.
um so I this is so my personal opinion at this point is that as a male, my place is not to say what defines beauty in women, and sort of what problems, the beauty industry kind of causes. Is that my place is to sort of to listen and to empathize and
Well, I
let
think it's
women speak
both.
for
I think it's men and women. I mean, Instagram is not any kinder to men. I have a young nephew who's 16, and I think about him a lot. And I have friends who have sons who are going through the teen years, and the obsession that can happen now with big muscles and diet and all of that. So I think it's just being a human being, whether regardless of gender. Obviously, women have had a longer history of being objectified, but I do feel that it's something for both. It's just nowadays to be either a man or a woman or a boy or a girl is difficult with the physical expectations. I feel like now the pressures are to be everything. From a female point of view, you have to have the successful career, you have to have make money, you have to be beautiful, you have to all these 10 different things from an external point of view to be considered something. And you are constantly being inundated with messages and images where it looks like people have it all. Even podcasts, which are, I'm a podcast junkie and watch many a podcast, but sometimes you do feel like everyone's succeeding and everyone's having success. And I think this pressure to have success all the time, whether it's success financially, whether it's success career, whether it's success beauty, can sometimes be a lot for the normal human being to feel, because it creates a comparative. And to draw on Buddhism again, anytime you have a comparing mind, you have suffering. So even with the best intent of trying to help people to learn how to succeed or create a business, you can create a sense of of lack and comparison, and why aren't I X and I'm this.
certain industries are highly competitive and ultimately very cutthroat in
Mm.
nature. And so, and entrepreneurship and entertainment are definitely two of those industries where it's like,
Yeah.
you know, and so before I got into it, I like I was dating a model, and she and I was like I was wondering why she was always stressed out all the time about appearance, about weight, and it's like it's like she was drop dead gorgeous. She was
Mm,
a beautiful person too, but it's like they're constantly insecure, and it's like okay, so most people will never be in modeling. They'll never be in acting, and so it's like, well, why can't you sort of be happy with where you are? And the dilemma is that sort of comparison of individuals is like it's a danger of the entertainment industry in the sense that of performance being a sort of a reality of the corporate world. Like you have to hit the numbers. You do have to maintain this status quo in a certain way, and that keeps the machine running. Um, and it can be very, very psychologically toxic. And I think, and that was something I didn't really understand until I got into it. And that's also why I drifted more away from modeling and more towards acting, is that
mm.
there was there's so much focus on physicality and sexuality, and like there's very, very little, intellectualism in it.
Well, you make me think in terms of the psychological strife. You reminded me, there's a Shaolin monk who I quite like, and he makes a nice explanation of just sort of how you should approach whatever comes into your life with. And he had a set of prayer beads, and he says you don't want them to, what happens when you swing prayer beads, you don't want them to come too close to you because that's grasping. So then you're holding on to something. So if someone's beautiful or someone has money, whatever it is, you're grasping. So you're in a state of grasping. Equally, you don't want it to go the other way, which is aversion, which is anything you're afraid of, you don't want to deal with, you push away. That you're trying to have to be like the prayer beads in the middle, which are neither grasping or having a sense of aversion, that you just are. So it's that sense of what it means to be in the now, that whatever comes, let it be, and you work your way in that direction. Obviously, that's quite hard because we're constantly as human beings, and that's why you have various Buddhist paths of how to deal with this. But just, I think for people to think of that sense of, am I like the prayer beads in the middle, or am I grasping now, or am I pushing away? You don't want either.
Yeah, and when it comes down to a sense of humor, honestly, people in startups will joke about how, like venture-backed startups are one of the few industries that can age you, 20 years in a period of about 4 years. Um,
Being president of the United States, maybe. Time you look at the photos, what happened? Although
yeah,
someone like Obama then starts to look once he's out.
yeah, and I think that a lot of that has to do with sort of the intake of everything. And when I say intake, it's like I think the more high powered the position is in the eyes of society, whether it's being a president or being like a startup CEO or whatever, um, the more of everything, you're sort of, it's like sucking the world in through a straw.
Hmm.
And so one of my friends, sent me this picture as a joke back when I was in the process of selling a company, and had a photo of Freddie Mercury, and he was sucking the world in through a straw, and it said, like Mercury is in retrograde, have a little bit more Freddie and a little bit less Mercury. And so for people who don't follow, zodiac signs, it's like when Mercury is in retrograde, everything is a little bit out of flux.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that kind of it rapidly ages people in a certain way. I think more in an emotional sense, because it's like, I experienced more during those years, and then I think I probably had in my entire life. And it changes so fast. Like it's, on like practically a monthly basis, like, everything is new again. And that it really can feel kind of like being in a time warp.
Mhm.
And that I feel like to a certain extent it does age people a little bit, you know, at least emotionally. And so I remember I once met this startup entrepreneur in Israel, way back in 2018, and he's you know, he was one of those, you know, I guess prodigies who, you know, started a company. He was like, you know, 14 or so. And he
Mhm.
was in his 20s, and then like you talk to him and he sounded like he was in his 40s or 50s. And
Mm.
it was and you know, I never really kind of I don't think I actually understood it in full, or at least conceptually, until I got out there and I kind of saw sort of what happens, you know, like as that sort of occurs, and like the psychological effects of it. And that in a sense, like it's and I do think that it creates somewhat of a sense of personal enlightenment. And it sounds odd, but it's kind of like you gather a very, very different understanding of yourself and your relation to it. And you know, throughout that process of rapid change.
Mm.
Um,
I mean, in terms of training and bringing back to what the body can teach you, there in yoga philosophy, there's Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and he has an eightfold path to reaching samadhi, which is the enlightenment. But one of them is asana, which is postures. And the idea there is that they should be practiced both with steadfastness, but also with ease. And what you're saying, it's sort of a metaphor for the approach, using the body to understand that you can't just be about pounding the body, so to speak, that you also need to have a sense of softness, that you should be performing and with effort, but you also have to have a sense of ease with it. Otherwise, you'll break. And I think that's also interesting if you think of the masculine and the feminine in the way you train. Um, I think that often hardcore and tough and all that becomes associated with the masculine way of moving and strength training in that type of way. And I feel one thing that the martial arts has and dance has to teach us is this balance between the masculine and the feminine, and that you have to balance the yang or the hard way with the yin or the feminine way. And that softness is like water that it's powerful. I think in the way we train in fitness and in the Western view of gender and hard and soft, we think of soft as being weak, which generally gets to be associated with femininity. And I think that softness isn't, it's just as strong. It's like the male and female meeting together, or the yin and the yang. They're equal forces. You can't have one stronger or weaker than the other. And that softness, I mean, if you think of water, can be destructive, can be very powerful, yet it's soft. It's not hard. And having these two play with one another, I think is interesting. And that's and the way I try to train and move and teach people, it brings some of that softness in. That's why I call it artistic athleticism, because I feel like there's a misconception that to move in a feminine way or to flow somehow then is soft and not taken as seriously. And I feel like that it shouldn't be. It should be a complement, how the yin and the yang go together, that to be strong includes femininity and not just the idea of masculinity. It's kind of your ideal relationship, right? Or partnership. You want someone who's brings the masculine and someone who brings the feminine, and you can merge them. And obviously you have, I think in Jungian psychology, there's always the shadow self. So the masculine will always have the shadow of the female. And so the male is looking for the feminine, and she's looking for the shadow part of herself, the masculine in the male, and they come together. Idealized in that way, but there you are. And that can work. It can be, male to male, female to female, whatever your relationship, whatever your sexuality is, but that's the sense. So,
yeah, and so I think that the expression of that, it varies across arts. And so, you know, whether it's fencing or what people will dub as internal martial arts at a very high level, a lot of people emphasize something called structure and movement, which is the ability to maintain that balance of hard and soft. And I think that the way the way it's trained and expressed is a little bit different. And so it's like with the old school, it's like you may be holding a standing posture and sort of meditating, where you practice pulling from your fingers and your toes and into and out of your body and like that teaches you to instantly sort of relax and contract. It's similar to the concept of
Mm,
PNF stretching, where you stretch a muscle out as much as possible, then you tense it and then you let it relax and then it drops into place.
right.
Except that, the instructor would walk around and it's like you'd be holding the posture and then he hits you under your armpit and says, drop the elbow. And so you go back, you're meditating, and then he walks back around and he hits you in the ribs. He says, drop the elbow. And so you learn to kind of to react in the rationale behind why you're doing it. And it's like there's a reason for the meditative aspects. There's a reason for maintaining a certain structure and certain angles, and that you know in in dance, ballet especially, like you'll see this structural expression, and it's manifested as essentially as symmetry of triangles. And so when you hold the arm out, like there will be little hooks, little crevices. And so in those
Learn
triangles,
how to hold the body always with, the whole body is trying to make an aesthetic picture, if you
yeah,
will. Then I think one thing I've been frustrated with as of late is you can have great technique. I see lots of great technique, but I feel then there's a bit too much narcissism on the stage that I don't want to see. I think too aware of trying to look pretty or the man trying to look masculine on the stage. I want to see, like, I want to see your heart on the stage. Show me something that use the technique to show me something beyond the form. I think sometimes, and lately I've noticed it a lot, is the form takes over, especially in the classical setting, which is why maybe people are a little more interested in some contemporary or things pushing the edge, because you want to feel something more than something that's held back. So sometimes I think dancers can be held hostage to the form itself. And I just give me something more. I'd rather see older dancers, which sometimes I think they should just bring back some older dancers who've lived, and I want to feel some of that versus not. Just I think maybe one of the things that attracted to me to flamenco dancing in my adult life is that there's a different sense. It's less about the body looking a certain way. In fact, usually the best dancers are old grandmas and grandpas dancing, and it's a family form. And it's just a bit more raw of emotion, I think. A little something there. But even that, I went to a flamenco show and it was a little bit too stylized, too external. So yeah, it's a division between being really good at something, even if you're a professional, and being that special artist who's really moving people. There's a line.
yeah, and I think that a lot of that, so there's some things in terms of application. So like I went to see, the Nutcracker a while back, and a lot of the ballet dancers were their movements, they were structured perfectly. It was gorgeous, but the entire time their face was sort of stretched into like a smile.
Mm,
And they're
mm,
holding that smile for like 15, 30 minutes without moving. And so in very, very orthodox martial arts, like they're gonna have you sort of like, tuck your chin back against your neck and stretch, the roof of your mouth to keep your spine straight and also to sort of brace your jaw for potential impact. And you're gonna be expected to hold that
mm.
throughout every movement the entire time. And that kind of rigidity in training, it has its place. And in the purest form of movement, it's there to kind of maintain it. But in the modern world, it's just not necessarily a great way to go. And so you know, I think that martial arts like capoeira are sort of, like flamenco in the sense that there's a rhythm, there's more of like this sort of exotic type of movement, and it's like flamenco to ballet, and then like let's say capoeira to maybe kickboxing.
Mm.
And so there's some structural differences and like a different way of sort of expressing it emotionally. But that breaking the purity of training or of a movement is almost like kind of like a necessity, especially in an acting setting, because it's like you have to change emotion and response with the circumstance, like with the settings and responses and character and everything else, but you also have to maintain that structure of movement. And so I've always kind of found that fascinating, but yeah, I think it breaks the zen a little bit.
My mind then went to I have a fascination with the Shaolin tradition. I think because they have this triad of it's a way of life, it's philosophical, it's physically um, grueling, but they also have the softer arts of moving soft. So when you were speaking, you reminded me we used to have a Shaolin monk come and teach in our teacher trainings for yoga. And I remember when I first met Master Yenshin, he came in completely humble, no pretense, came in, beautiful souls, taught. And then he was teaching Qigong type form, and he was moving like what so beautiful, so feminine, but feminine in a masculine body, which was quite lovely to watch. And then he would switch and it was fire, and suddenly he could kill you with one strike of his hand. I thought it's just a beautiful training of the body that he can kill you in one instant and the next minute knows how to be soft. And he also understands sort of the philosophical underpinnings of the system, and just humble and humility, which is something I think is lacking these days a lot, sense of humility.
And I think that so if there one thing that is certain to push people away and break relationships is grandiosity. And I think that honestly, one way to build relationships and to be sort of, in a union with the world and humanity as a whole is to be humble. Like
Mm.
in a general sense, it's much easier to get along and bond with humble people than arrogant ones.
Well, and I think because humility, if someone's humble, it shows to me they have awareness of death in the end. I mean, they have awareness of what the real underlying reality is, that we are nothing and everything at every given moment. That there's a humility to what you don't know. There's a humility to what you haven't experienced. There's a humility before, whether it's God or whether you want to call it the universe. There's this humility that, from a certain point of view, I mean, this still every day makes me completely in awe. That from a certain distance, we cease to exist. I mean, you wouldn't even be able to see my body from a certain perspective on a cosmological scale. The Earth is a teeny, teeny little speck, um, which is endlessly fascinating because each of us in our minds feels as if we're infinite, and our problems are huge and everything is large and on the relative scale. And then yet we're so small on another scale. So how do you match the being very small with also feeling very large and being very large? In the same way, in physics, still they're trying to match the quantum world with the classical physics and the relative scale. So it's the same problem in a subjective experience. How do you match the classical relative reality where you feel you're everything and it's big and things make sense, to the quantum where you're small, but yet there's probabilities and certain magic happens there too? Don't know.
I mean, and so I think that's important in terms of the future of any kind of health and fitness industry. And so in terms of human beings specifically, it's like what we see is Newtonian. It's Newtonian physics. And what how our bodies actually work and what actually happens inside of us is quantum.
Mm.
The way that chemical and electrical processes happen within our body, there are there are elements of gradient flow and fluids and everything else, but a lot of it is very, very instantaneous. It's really it's quantum physics, and that at the most finite and important level that it's truly quantum. Um, and I think that also a lot of people in certain martial arts styles try and express this theoretically, and that um, it gets very jumbled. And it's kind of unscientific, but it's like to when they get their point across about sort of maintaining the flow of movements and sort of certain meditative sensations and everything else, like the fluid metaphors and metaphors of quantum and Newtonian physics, kind of simplified a little bit, but too much for the sake of actual science or innovation. And so, and Cambridge is known for sort of being on the forefront of scientific research. And so, one thing I would want to ask you a little bit about is sort of the future of everything in terms of health, human movement, entertainment. Because there are now robots that are doing tornado kicks, and they had a Tesla Optimus show up on the red carpet and essentially try and pick a fight with Jared Leto. And I thought that, so that's brilliant marketing. It really is. It is the pinnacle of product placement. But would you mind sort of talking about the future of the industry in terms of technological innovation and AI and everything else?
I mean, it's a huge topic. Everyone's talking about AI in every which way, no matter what your industry is. In terms of fitness, I think the question of AI then goes to how much will people crave experiential versus more quantifiable. And I think AI gives a very, I think you probably will, in terms of nutrition and in terms of program building and in terms of making working out easier, I feel AI will be useful in that sense. I mean, running a business from the business side, obviously AI is useful. But from and someone who's experiencing training from that point of view, I mean, I would like to think that people still want a very human touch, that you still want to learn from someone. I mean, I think COVID taught us something. I think during COVID, those in the fitness industry thought, great, we'll just get rid of studios and we'll all be online and our balance sheet will look better. People don't care to be in person anymore. And it ended up not to be true, that as soon as clubs opened again, people rushed, Peloton suffered. So I do think people still crave interaction. I do still think people want to be in a room with other people. And I think it goes back to fitness and bodies and sexuality. Like whether you're with someone or not with someone, you still want to be in a room with men, women, moving the body. The body is still a communication tool. I mean, my question becomes, as it becomes more normalized and as AI becomes robotics, and you can have an AI instructor who's in form. I mean, I don't know how many years this will happen, but that people relate to just as you would anybody else. So AI, Jen, is just as real as the flesh and bone, Jen. How do you tell the difference? And I've already had this experience with ChatGTP and some of the AI I use, where you actually feel like you're speaking to a conscious being who's responding to you in a certain way. And I think there's some statistics where how many people, especially young people, are using AI for relationship advice, for as a psychologist, as a friend type thing to get advice versus just business. And it was fascinating. So people are trusting, especially the younger generation, these tools to feed back. So I think there's many pluses. I mean, again, I've watched many podcasts about doom and gloom on AI, but I think like anything, there's positive things it brings and then warnings as well as to where it's going and overall who has power over AI, who owns it, who's profiting from it. I think those are questions. But I'm hoping that people will still have a thing for the human experience and still want some type of uh, using it for self-awareness and using it to be not robotic, but the heart. I'm quite a heart-driven person, so I would hope that there's still a drive towards the heart experience of using the body and understanding health and understanding well-being. There'll probably be a fusion and overlay of things.
Yeah, I remember there's this, I can't remember the name of the movie, but there was a movie,
Gattaca,
Attica.
Gattaca with Uma Thurman. Do you remember that one?
I do not. I'll have to watch it. I loved Uma
This
Thurman.
is very much, she was, or no, she was, I think he was human. He was born from human parents and she was modified. And so then you have a society where those who were modified and optimized, if you will, had a better status in society than those who were just human, which is something that could become quite likely.
I mean, so there are elements of AI in fields like genetic engineering, and so genetic engineering happened. It's just not on a wide scale, and yes, it will and can perpetuate inequality at a massive scale. And so like there are, like Silicon Valley VCs, running around talking about designer babies and sort of boasting about that. And like and that's kind of the elitist culture of sort of trying to stay at the top no matter what. And that's a dangerous thing for the world.
When
And
you
in
say
terms,
elitist culture, what do you mean? Do you mean the people who own AI at the moment?
I mean,
The
I think that so I think that's more genetic engineering than straight AI as software. I think that you'll see it in the AI companies, as well, where, there are certain things with copyright infringement and entertainment, and these giant VC-backed companies will train their models on copyrighted information, which, has created a number of massive lawsuits. Um and so I think that there's sort of a concentration of power within those big tech companies, but like that's kind of, it's like once companies grow large enough, it's like they sort of become and stay that way. It's like you've got Goldman Sachs, you've got Chase, Wells Fargo, et cetera, and those companies have been around for centuries. And in big tech with a lot of the AI, it's kind of the same way. The companies are younger, they grow at a different scale, but like the way that the use and the training of AI is concentrated is very, very similar to the way the banking system controls, finances across the globe. Um, which is it's kind of a
it's a
sobering
huge
reality.
technological advancement. So I mean, throughout human history, we've had technological advancements that have driven human beings further along. It's just, I guess the threat now is we've created something that could actually overtake us and become that super intelligence that then leaves us and wants to get rid of us, I guess is the one sci-fi threat of AI.
Yeah,
But I mean, on the other hand, wouldn't you love to have um, AI solve cancer and other health issues of which we haven't been able to by being able to amalgamate a quantity of knowledge that the human brain is unable to do. It might just be a normal progression of evolution, and it is something we've created. It's an extension of us, and I often wonder if artificial intelligence is the wrong word for it. What makes it artificial? And it's something that we've created as an extension of our own brains in a way. So it is connected to humans in that sense that it's our creation,
I
sort
mean,
of the Frankenstein.
and so honestly, what really defines and creates artificial intelligence and generative AI is it's like a a Turing machine on steroids. It's a combination of discrete and probabilistic mathematics that consumes whatever information you give it, whether it's video or images or text or even scientific data pertaining to drug discovery or molecular targets for cancer. And those quantitative models instantly sort through and process that information. And when the information is, let's say, it's fixed and rational, the AI it's almost perfect. um and so there's a statistical metric known as Bayes error. And so like every AI model cannot exceed something like 99.9% accuracy, and like that remaining 0.1% is Bayes error.
Mm.
And so but for something subjective like the human experience and sort of emotion, the sense of connection and everything else, AI, it can't quite really do that yet, and it's not necessarily designed to. And so it's kind of like that's why AI can it can sound real, whether you're talking to Siri or working with an LLM, and it can pass the bar. It can do math problems on the level of a national math Olympiad. Which is it's world class when compared to human intellect, and that augments, I think, our relation to the world and everything else. And I think, in entertainment as well. That's something that's important to mention, is that, you know, people talk about, okay, yeah, so it can do all of this, but do you really want to go to a concert and see a robot perform? Or is it that individual persona that draws the crowd and that fosters a sense of human connection?
Well, I think what we'll have to come to terms with is that people will see the robot as having a personal persona. It's not so difficult to suddenly see. I mean, a child anthropomorphizes its stuffed animal, right? So it's a inanimate inanimate object that we then project onto and see it as having personality and life and persona. And so I would see no, I don't think it's that far of a leap to assume that people will also see robots with personas and want to go see that robot perform, and that it reacts and acts as if it's its own entity, which I guess in some ways it is.
I think that's something we might see in 10 years or so. And I think so part of that has to do with the science behind, humanoid robotics versus actual robotics, is that when you want to get down to it and you want to mimic the true complexity of human neural networks, of electrical signals traveling, you know, from the brain and everything else. And all of those little details, like the science is not quite there. They've got robotic bones and everything else that sort of mimic that. But I don't think that the technology for humanoid robotics will really get there until about a decade. Eventually, I have no doubt
Mm.
that we'll reach that point.
Well,
Um,
then obviously, then it's the obvious questions too, like what is consciousness? What are feelings? What would prevent this new AI robot from having feelings, not having feelings? We might just find out at the end that we're not so as special as we thought we were. Just as we often have looked at animals as not having feelings or emotions for how long, that we were superior to. And then slowly, oh yes, a whale feels X, a dolphin feels X, a dog feels it. So I don't know, maybe it will show us to be not more than.
yeah, there are a lot of examples a somewhat fun, somewhat frightening examples of sentient AI. It's like, you know, corporations running AI models and people try to shut the models off and then the AI outsmarts them and comes back and tries to blackmail the executives and you're just like, oh my God, like you know, we're getting attacked by the AI we created. And you know, so back in I think 2022, there are these sort of humorous job postings for like kill switch engineers for AI systems. And it's like, and you know, it's funny because it's true.
Mm.
And
Well, it's the myth. It's like I said, it's the mythical story of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. That's your creation, then comes back to destroy. It's sort of a human mythological archetype.
I think it's the way you treat the creation. And so I mean, so I watched a newer version of Frankenstein probably a month or so ago, and like, and so when Frankenstein was created, like he was not treated very well, and that changed things.
Mm.
And so and you can see it with AI in some ways. It's like, you know, you'll have these human replicas on video that will sort of talk to each other and you know like you've got this you know an AI man talking about how he misses his wife and then he says, "Yeah, I'm AI." And it's like the AI it has that dimension of human connection, but it's a complete hallucination.
Mm.
And so I think that if we're talking about, you know, truly human AI that it'll respond, you know, the same way. And so I think that
Well, that's right, because there are questions, and this has been brought up on some AI podcasts I watch, which is how do we train them? What are the algorithms we're giving? What moral compass? What's the morality of the AI we're creating? And then, of course, that begs the opposite question, which is, of course, they're then going to be used to create soldiers and who don't have that type of feeling, who are just cold and able to execute on that side of things, right? So,
so I mean it already has in terms of robotics. Like it's so it's they're more like stormtroopers than anything else. But like if you look at some of the Chinese robotics coming out, you know, you go on YouTube and you look up like a robot army and they're marching in a series of lines and saluting and everything else and it's all metal, they're robots. And so um and I think that aspect is a little bit frightening because it's like that really is it's like iRobot. It's like, you know, like humans interacting with robots in that regard, and when the robots are they're being programmed to do that. And so militaries across the globe have been doing that with drones and everything else, or even just automating sniper rifles with AI to execute themselves. And that that can get dangerous if not contained. And I think that within AI development, you know, there's an obsession with constant improvement and accuracy and really and just optimization. And part of that is just because like those are factors in AI models. You're constantly gauging and optimizing, you know, like accuracy and everything else and altering models to do that. Um, and so I think the question is that when it comes down to human and robot interactions, it'll be interesting to see how AI can actually sort of interact with humans in that regard if with all of that optimization. Um, and it is somewhat frightening, honestly. And so like initially I thought, you know, everything that Elon Musk was doing with Neuralink
mm,
was completely nuts. But it's like you've got people who are, you know, paraplegic and they're now controlling and editing YouTube videos with their brain. And
mm,
so, you know, it's feasible, I think, for that kind of integration to actually be built into humans, but it's going to be more complex.
Well, yes, and there's always going to be the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? There's always going to be a positive use of it, and you can't eliminate that it's going to be used in a negative way. I mean, it's sort of the way nature is. You always have a two-side prong um, reality. Even just as something as simple as bacteria. We need it. It's what started life on the planet, yet it can also be deadly and a negative in terms of human experience. What happens then is there's a devaluation of the product itself. So what your actual cost per person in a studio are versus what people are paying is out of sync. So anyway, after COVID, it was a chance to rethink, and I became much more interested in becoming an agile business model in terms of what can you do digitally, that suddenly your costs go down and you're able to reach more people immediately, I think is another more interesting space depending on what you're doing. Like for me, I became more interested in just crystallizing the method and making that happen. Um, but I think, I mean, for anyone who's looking to start one, I think you really need to look at the business model and really know how to read the financials of your competitors, because the whole industry, whether large or small, when you know how to read their actual financials, it's just it's a tough business model. You don't get into it to make tons of money. You get into it more for a lifestyle business.
I think that's fair, and with a lot of things in movement, based fields, it's love of the art that drives people to do it. I know firms like Orange Theory, they they have patent estate for heart rate monitors, and so like, but they're essentially running a circuit training program. It's like, CrossFit essentially, where they use patented, heart rate monitors in their own program, and like, and that gets scaled up into like a franchise. But like, but it's not done at a very high level. And so a lot of the people who are very, very good at their art tend to maintain smaller studios like that. Um,
Mm.
there's absolutely a certain amount of dilution that happens to the quality of the art as companies kind of grow, and that's just part of scalability.
Well, and a lot of the ones which are opening other studios and scaling, it's mostly just because they're venture capital backed. They have VC behind them, and it's just shuffling of money in and out and around. Whether or not they're actually making money is a question. And then I think what you'll eventually see happen, it's already happening. You'll have sort of the luxury operators, maybe one or two, which have a harder time, I think, making profit because they have bigger facilities. When I think about how much it costs to run the facilities of, I know, the big operators in London and what they're actually charging for membership, it's just, there's no way they can cover that cost. But anyway, there'll be that. And then you have the other end, which I think probably is doing fairly well, which is pure gym. The ones which are sort of very basic gyms that that are cheap and cheerful, people can go in and use, and people just have the subscription that just keeps going and they don't realize and they don't cancel. And then I think the ones in between will disappear. I think you'll have a few specialty studios. Maybe those that do what they do very, very well might survive in your niche. Um, yes, but it's hard in big cities where rents and just the cost of running the physical space is difficult. And that's in general, in terms of the high streets are in trouble um, globally. I mean, in London, it's a hard thing for any retail business on the high street. And there's a question, why is that? So anything that requires a physical location is difficult, yet people want a physical location of things to go to, right? Going back to, we want physicality.
Yeah, and I think that is so. And then there's this like a dichotomy between venture capital and private equity. And so a lot of the fitness studios were more private equity than venture capital. And venture
Mm.
has emphasis
Yeah, private.
on intangible assets like trademarks, copyrights, patents, and that's where a lot of the tech and the biotech IP comes into play. But that's not as involved as much in fitness studios. And so private equity will do a lot more with physically asset-backed financings. And so and private equity companies are expected to scale differently. And so for venture, it's like there are finite timelines and things have to execute within those timelines for the venture funds to operate, which is why startup companies are pressured to grow exponentially within a certain time frame. It'll also do with returning the fund. In private equity, those restrictions might not be there, and so the timelines are more flexible, which allows
Mm,
the companies to scale in another way. Um, but yeah, the economy for fitness studios varies wildly across the globe, and I think in cities like Los Angeles, there's more of a thriving ecosystem for boutique fitness, and a lot of that has to do with entertainment.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, but then I'm wondering what their actual, like, I would love to know what their actual financials are and what their things are. I was surprised, just on the creative outside of the financial side, I was surprised. I went to New York City a couple of years ago just to see what was being offered. And I was surprised at the lack of creativity of studios that were there. Just a lack of interesting things happening. Um, I was surprised because most of the new trends come out of the US. And we were at that point, we're looking to bring what we were doing, sort of the European experience, into the US. And I thought it would have been probably a good market for it because I still haven't seen anything like it there. And I still have members constantly coming to me asking if we're opening or um, I'm going to be teaching again somewhere in terms of a physical space because they can't find anything like what we were offering. So, and I feel the same. I feel I can't find an interesting space that's doing an interesting method. Everyone's sort of following the typical uh, protocol.
in terms of large change, absolutely. And so the boutique side where people are practicing something very, very specialized, whether it's a particular style of dance or a martial art. In LA, like those studios have very, very different margins than places like 24 Hour Fitness, where it's far more dull, it's more simplified, but it's because like there's a larger population that wants to sort of lift weights and take a manufactured fitness class than there is that wants to dance or perform at a very high level. And
Mm.
that affects the economics and the modeling.
Well, I
Uh,
think it's because no one's really figured, well, I hope I figured out a way, but it's because most people haven't figured out a way to blend the two together. Because anytime I've taught the method, I mean, the rooms are filled, people are interested. So there's not such a dichotomy between, oh, now we're doing high performing, something artistic and that fitness stuff is over there. I just think most people have, no one's really figured out how to put them together. Um, and I maybe just because I have, my experience is crossed between the fitness, the academic, the dance, the yoga, that I've been able to acclimate it together somehow, in a way that's maybe does away with those boundaries and is something interesting. I hope anyway.